Hi, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome again to one of our Islamic Center of Boston series, with Qalam Institute, in collaboration between the two institutions. Alhamdulillah, we tonight have a virtual session with Ustadha Faduma Warsame, who hails from the great state of Texas, where everyone calls each other y'all, and it's rubbing off on us here up in Boston. So Ustadha Faduma is a Qalam Alima graduate from the class 2021, and she currently resides actually in Minneapolis, Minnesota, serves in the capacity of the University and Hospital Chaplain at University of Minnesota. I think some of us as physicians really realize the importance of a hospital chaplain. So shukran, thank you so much, Ustadha, for the work you do with patients. She also serves as a teacher and board member of the Strive Sisterhood, an educational community-based program for Muslim women in Minnesota. And tonight she'll be sharing with us incredible session. As you know, we've done most of the latest talks in the Sira in Nabawiyya on a lot of the ghazwas, the battles. And last week was a beautiful talk on Sulh Hudaybiyah. Today we'll be taking a deep dive into Fatah Makkah, which is historically and temporally in sequence right after that. And then at the end of the session, we'll have about 10 minutes of question and answers. And then we'll also remind you about our virtual session, inshallah, this Friday. So Ustadha Faduma, welcome, and you're on.
Jazakallahu khair. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilma. O Allah, teach us that which is beneficial, benefit us with that which you have taught us, and increase us in knowledge. Allahumma ameen. It's a pleasure of mine to be here with you all and to be able to continue this discussion, continue this talk about the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as you mentioned today, inshallah, we'll be talking about what is known as the conquest of Mecca or Fath Mecca. And so I'm going to go ahead and share, inshallah, a slideshow that will, inshallah, help us stay on top of the conversation. So when we're talking about the conquest of Mecca, it's not possible to talk about the conquest of Mecca without talking about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which was covered last week. And if you remember, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was a treaty that was made between the Quraysh and the Muslims the year the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions went for Umrah. If you remember correctly, they were barred from making the Umrah, and so they were not allowed to make the Umrah, but rather were asked to come back the following year. And so when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam drafted up this treaty with the Quraysh, you will notice that we'll come back to that slide, but you will notice that it was very much not in favor of the Muslims. This treaty was a treaty that, if you look at it, which I have some of the conditions of this treaty, the main thing that we gained from the treaty is the fact that there was going to be 10 years of peace between the Quraysh and between the Muslims, right? So these two groups that were fighting, and if you look at majority of the battles, were not initiated by the Muslims, and so you see that there was warfare happening, back and forth, that they had come to these terms that there was going to be peace for 10 years, right, between the Quraysh and the Muslims. And the point that I want everyone to remember is that it was not just between the Muslims and the Quraysh, but it was also with anyone who allied themselves with the Quraysh and anyone who allied themselves with the Muslims, okay? And so this was a treaty that, if you look at the timeline, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was drafted and signed in the 6th year after Hijrah. And Fath Mecca, which is this incident that we'll be talking about today, the conquest of Mecca or the opening of Mecca, ends up happening in the 8th year after Hijrah. And so you might ask yourself, well, what was Fath Mecca? Fath Mecca was, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, indeed, O Muhammad, Allah is talking to him, Inna fatahna laka fathan mubinan. indeed, we have given you a very open victory, O Muhammad. If you remember if you remember, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was something that the companions, in fact, the companion Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu felt like this is not really that much in favor for us, right? Like if you look at it right there, the very fact that they were not allowed to go and make the Umrah, alhamdulillah, I was able to come back from Umrah just a couple of days ago, or a week ago almost. And just thinking about the journey from Medina to Mecca, right? It's just like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions. Can you imagine getting to a state of ihram, reciting the talbiyah, right? And you can imagine their journey being for such a long time, right? That they're traveling days. And then they get to, part outside of the city and are told, no way, you're not coming in today. And you cannot come back and, complete your Umrah until next year. And so they weren't able to complete their Umrah, the disappointment that they felt. On top of that, if you look at this treaty, it is totally, favoring, as we may look at it, the Quraysh, that the Muslims can not leave Mecca to go to Medina, but anyone from Medina can go to Mecca, which if you think about the likelihood of that, it's pretty low, right? But the fact that Muslims whose hearts really, really were yearning to make hijrah with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, to come to the city of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, are told that if you end up coming, and the ones who actually already left are to be sent back, right? And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, understanding all of this, knows, he sees something, right? That there's goodness that's going to come from this, right? The vision of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That Umar radiallahu anhu goes to him and says, are we, are they not upon falsehood? Are we not upon the truth? Like, what is the meaning of this? But the Prophet ﷺ, understanding, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give him a clear victory. Something good is going to come about this. And the goodness that he was anticipating, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is Fath Makkah, right? That Allah is telling him, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're going to give you this great opening. And so what happens is that, right before this, actually, what happens is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we mentioned that whoever they ally with, those two tribes are also come into agreement with this Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So there are two tribes that end up entering this agreement. They are the tribe of Banu Bakr and Banu Khuza'a. Okay. What is really important to know about these two tribes is the fact that they were enemies to one another, similar to the way that Quraysh sought an enemy from the Muslimin, the way that the Quraysh persecuted, the Muslimin. These were two tribes that had an issue from before, and they thought to themselves, Banu Khuza'a came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and said, can we seek an allyship with you, right? And Banu Bakr then goes to the Quraysh and says, can we seek an allyship with you? And so they did this because they felt that by allying with these two groups, that they're going to also have that amnesty, that safety for those 10 years. But at the same time, Banu Khuza'a, if you look at historically, they were the ones there was something that happened way in their past where there was a man who was from Banu Bakr that was killed. And so you can imagine Banu Bakr is thinking about this revenge. But now that they're in this peace treaty, the idea is, okay, there's going to be peace for this, for these 10 years. However, that's not the case. What happens is that Banu Bakr, right, ends up orchestrating a massacre of not just the men of Banu Khuza'a, but their women and children as well. That this ends up becoming a bloodbath. And what adds more fuel to the fire is that the Quraysh were somehow involved in this entire thing as well too. And the type of mentality that they have is, well, the Muslims are going to know about this, right? We're going to hide our faces. We're going to go to, we're going to help Banu Bakr go out and, seek out this revenge against Banu Khuza'a. And, they cross the line, obviously. They end up breaking the treaty and they end up hurting so many people. A man by the name of Amr bin Salim ends up being one of the people who ends up fleeing and escaping and runs right to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and starts yelling and screaming and saying, they killed us, they massacred us, right? Banu Bakr, they came and they slaughtered us and they hurt us and they massacred us. And so they killed the women and the children, right? And this is brought to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Amr bin Salim says to him, you gave us your word, right? That we are going to have safety and amnesty, right? And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the type of person, and what he preached was that trust, right? It was the trust that he had, not just for somebody who he was in allyship, but like promises. Promises were very important. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to make the khutbah, he would often say, La imana liman la amanata lahu, that there is no iman for the one who cannot be trusted. And so imagine this man comes to him crying, pleading to him, you need to do something, right? We were massacred by Banu Bakr, and the Quraysh were involved, and they are trying to keep it under wraps. They're not coming, they're not trying to talk about this involvement that they have. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, don't worry about it, we'll handle it. On his way out of the city, he runs into none other than Abu Sufyan, who hears about the fact that this man was possibly in that city, in that vicinity. And he asks him, where are you coming from? He ends up figuring out that this man came from Medina, right? And so he realizes, oh, he's from Banu Khuza'a. He just is leaving now Medina. So he told on us, right? But he cannot give the impression that the Quraysh were involved in any way. And so he ends up leaving, this man ends up leaving, but he goes to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he ends up trying to convince Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that the Quraysh were not involved. In fact, in some narrations, it mentions that basically like he tried to act like he didn't even know what was going on, right? But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam understood and knew that you guys broke the treaty, and you should know what's coming next, right? And so what happens is that Abu Sufyan, knowing this, ends up going to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, goes to Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, goes to Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and his wife Fatima bint Muhammad radiallahu anha, and all of them trying to plead, like, please talk to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Talk to him, right? Let him know that this was, it's a mistake. Forgive us. And can you imagine the perfect word for this is audacity. Can you imagine the audacity, being someone who not only tortured and punished, right, a people for 20 plus years, but then now is wanting to go to them to seek mercy for something that you were directly involved in, something that you tried to do under their nose, and more than anything, hurting people who have done nothing to you. What did Banu Khuza'a do to the Quraysh? Absolutely nothing, right? And so he's going and pleading and asking for safety and asking for security and asking for mercy, and they're all just saying, listen, whatever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says goes. I'm so sorry. There's nothing I can say to you, and there's nothing I can do to you. Maybe you can try to go make a case or plead, a case in front of everyone. So he goes and he starts making, he starts pleading, to the community, right? And no one says anything to him. So what does he do? He leaves, and he heads back to Mecca with his head down, and lets them know the jig is up. Everyone, they know what we've done. And he tells them he did. He said, I tried pleading with them, and they pretty much mocked him and ridiculed him for what he did. because they believe that, okay, well, if they're not going to have mercy on you, then that's insult to injury, because you just embarrass yourself in front of them as well. And so we understand that soon after this, the Prophet ﷺ gives the command that they're going to march, they're going to walk towards Mecca, but he doesn't say when exactly, but that they're going to go to the city of Mecca, and they're going to go back and take the city, right? And so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu starts making preparations, and many of the Sahaba, and they make these preparations to go back to Mecca. Now, it's really important to understand what was the attitude of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ going back to Mecca. You can imagine what I just said, 20 years, 20 years of oppression. Whenever I think about the seerah, when I think about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ living in both Mecca and Medina, it is one thing for the Quraysh, the Meccans, to persecute the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ for 13 years in Mecca, and to persecute him in a way where they felt like, maybe possibly there was a threat, right? That he was a threat. But when someone, gets out of your hair, when someone leaves you, right? And the person, the so-called harm that they might have been causing you is no longer your issue, many people would be happy. Many people would be relieved that this person has left, right? Without even being asked to. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in finding security and safety, right, in the city of Medina, you would think that that would be enough for the Quraysh. But no, they then persecute him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for, another 6 years. But we remember the gap, those 2 years where the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was happening, right? And so that's a total of 19 years, almost 20 years, right? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is being persecuted by the Quraysh. If it's not wars, if it's not battles, if it's not a boycott, any type of persecution you can think of, they've done it. And so what do you think is the energy? What do you think is the beliefs that the Quraysh are holding actually in the city of Mecca, knowing Rasulullah ﷺ is coming? How would you feel knowing that you've bullied someone for 20 years and now they're coming to, quote unquote, pretty much they're coming to your house. They say, hey, I'm coming back to your house, or maybe they're moving back into your neighborhood. You bullied for someone for 20 years, right? This basic example, right? You may feel threatened, especially if this person is now, a lot more powerful than you. This person has something over you that you cannot defend yourself upon. You would feel some fear. Oh, he's coming back for revenge. He's coming back to, to take his anger out on us, right? And many people would say justifiably so, right? But when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions are coming back to Mecca, he's not in a state of ihram, so he's not going there for Umrah, any specific purpose, right? The companion Jabir radiallahu ta'ala anhu is said to, he has narrated to mention certain details about the Prophet ﷺ, how he was dressed, right? The Prophet ﷺ was wearing a black turban. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not in a state of ihram. Other companions shared that he was entering the city of Mecca with his head lowered. His head lowered. If you were coming back to incite revenge on people, or you were coming back to embarrass them, to humiliate them, right? Your head would not be lowered. I'll tell you that much. You would have your nose up in the air, right? Or not even nose up in the air, but you would have every right to just look people straight in the eye. But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was so humbled that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing this for him, that he's coming back, to where he was born, the place he spent 13 years of his life, right? The home of the Kaaba. And he's reciting, Inna fatahna laka fathan mubinan. over and over and over again, right? Just in a state of humility. Thank you, Ya Allah, for allowing me to come back here, right? Thank you, Ya Allah, for giving me this blessed opportunity to come back here. But while he's in this, state, like we mentioned, many of the other people are just worried. What is he going to do? Is he going to massacre us? Is he going to, do all of these horrible atrocities that we've done to them? And so as the Prophet ﷺ enters the state of Mecca, there are a few different things that end up happening, right? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ ends up going to the Kaaba, right? And when he goes to the Kaaba, it was narrated that he made this message. He made this message actually after, sorry, my slides are a little out of order. He makes that message after this. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ goes and immediately makes sajda to shukr, right? He goes and bows his head and shows gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this beautiful opportunity that he has given him, right? He goes and he drinks from the well of Zamzam, or he asks Zamzam to be brought to him, and he drinks from Zamzam, and he makes wudu. And when he makes wudu, the Sahaba are collecting the water falling through his hands, like they're just, water is slipping as he's making wudu, and they're gathering it. And there's a couple of people from the Quraysh that are sitting, to the side, and basically they say, like, we've never seen kings treated like this. Look at this Muhammad, like, look at his kingdom. And I believe it was the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Al-Abbas, who said, this is not kingship. This is not like monarch. This is not king. This is not a kingdom. This is prophethood. This is nubuwah, right? Only a prophet could do this. And they agree. They said, yeah, we haven't even seen kings treat their kings be treated this way, right? And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ ends up, after making wudu, what does he do? He makes tawaf around the Kaaba. And can you imagine, like, the last time the Prophet ﷺ made tawaf was obviously Umratul Qada, when he goes back to make Umrah. But just, now it's a different feeling. If anyone has ever made Umrah, you understand, like, now Umrah, making tawaf is such a significant experience. But if you've had the blessing of going to Umrah more than once, and I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us all that opportunity, you know that every Umrah is not the same, right? Like, you are a different person, right? Anytime you go, it may be, a couple of years in, it may be a couple of years in between, right? You might be younger, you might be older, you might have not had a child, and now you have a child, or you might have, so many things can be changed in the span of even months, right? Much less years. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is now entering back to the city of Mecca in a totally different scenario. And he's making tawaf, and there were, I believe, 360 idols around the Kaaba. And as he's walking around, he has a stick, and he's knocking down these idols. And he's saying, "Qul jaa al-haq wa zahaqa al-batil," right? Say the truth has come and falsehood has departed. Inna al-batila kana zahuqa. Indeed, falsehood is always, departing. And the Sahaba say that, like, the Prophet ﷺ is not even, it gets to a point where he's not even touching them. He's just pointing, and they're breaking apart, right? And if you think of that as an external cleaning of the Kaaba, right? The Kaaba is a symbol of monotheism. It's a symbol of oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And the devotion that Ibrahim alayhi salam had building this first house of God for the one true God. And so having all these idols, right, there's an external cleaning going on with the destruction of all these idols. And then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ ends up going inside of the Kaaba. When he goes inside of the Kaaba, there's a man who is a family actually who are the keepers of this key, right? And basically, before, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ previously had asked for the key and was denied. And now he goes and asks a companion to go retrieve that key, and the key is given to him, right? And so they go inside of the Kaaba and they see that there's other, idols inside of the Kaaba, and then there's drawings on the wall. And so they go and internally, the Prophet ﷺ and some of the Sahaba, they go and internally clean up the Kaaba as well of the shirk that's taking place inside of the Kaaba. And the Prophet ﷺ goes and prays 2 rak'ahs there. And he ends up making dua at all of the pillars that are inside of the Kaaba. Now, when the Prophet ﷺ comes out, there are other companions who are trying to like rush inside and go inside and pray inside the Kaaba as well. But the Prophet ﷺ sees Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu and tells Bilal to go on top of the Kaaba and to make the adhan. Okay, and so we already understand the optics of a man, much less a black man, standing on top of the Kaaba, and what that would mean for the Quraysh, right? First and foremost, the Kaaba being such a sacred, right, and a place for the Quraysh who aren't even Muslim, and much less someone that they view less than. Not only just standing on the Kaaba, but making this call to prayer. You can understand how, how it was just such a, in my eyes, a very revolutionary thing, right? But it wasn't revolutionary for the Muslimin. It was very revolutionary for the time and place that they were living in, right? For these people who have never seen a man honored in that way, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Bilal. And so he goes and he makes a call to prayer, right? And you can imagine like the shift that people are already feeling in the city, and how things are already going, how things are already happening. And then the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says this statement, right? That it was narrated by Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who said that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that on the day of the conquest of Makkah, Fath Makkah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mighty and the sublime, has made this land sacred, and it was not permissible to fight here for anyone before me. It was permitted for me for a few hours and of a day, and it is sacred by the decree of Allah, the might and the sublime. In other narrations, the Prophet ﷺ talks about this land is sacred, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like how sacred this ground is, right? Like this is a sacred ground, right? And you can understand, like, they're coming, and it's called the conquest of Mecca, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ makes an address, right, to the people there, that Allah has removed from you the pride of the time of ignorance with the boasting of ancestors. We understand they would boast their lineage, right? And that if someone did not have, everyone has lineage, but like which lineage is greater than what, right? That type of what is it, tribalism, that the Prophet ﷺ said, this is sickness. This is not something that we as Muslims take pride in, right? And that there's no the way that in the time of ignorance you all used to boast amongst one another due to your ancestors, right? And the fact that your ancestors, these ancestors that you're boasting over are mushrikeen, are idol worshippers, right? Indeed, one is only a righteous believer or a miserable sinner, right? In the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah does not look at our lineage. Our lineage means nothing, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the verse that's to come that lineage is a way to come to know one another. It's a way to differentiate. Yeah, I have a father, my father has a father, right? I have a family. There's a place that I come from. There are people who I share kindred, that I'm kindred with. But beyond that, لِتَعَارَفُوا, to come to know one another, beyond that, what else does that teach, or what else how does that inform where I'm going to end up on the day of judgment? It doesn't. It really doesn't. It does nothing for me, in fact, right? That all of us are from Adam alayhi salam, and the Prophet says, and Adam was created from dust. So you have this boasting and this, care. There's nothing wrong, by the way, to be obviously proud of where you come from, or proud of, your lineage. But at the end of the day, what causes us to fall into that sinfulness is when we use that to belittle one another, right? That's what causes arrogance, is when you belittle other people based off of something that is as superficial as lineage, right? And so the Prophet then, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, reads this verse where he says, "O mankind, ya ayyuhan nas, إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم." That, O mankind, that إن الله عليم خبير. O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes. And the purpose of all of that is لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may come to know one another. The purpose of Allah creating tribes, creating nations, creating, all of these different ways of differentiating ourselves from one another. The sole purpose of all of that is so that we become more acquainted with one another, right? Not isolated from one another, which, subhanAllah, when you think about division in our community and in the Muslim community, you find that is the sole thing that, and it's not the only thing, but it's one of the things that unfortunately causes much division, when in fact Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want that to be the reason of our division. In fact, he wanted it to be the thing that unites us all, right? لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that we may come to know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most righteous of you. لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. Taqwa, right? Taqwa is the thing that causes us to be more noble in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not background, not language, not skin color, not wealth, right? Not status. None of these things is going to make, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love you more. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you more because of your consciousness of him. How conscious of you are you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the Prophet ﷺ then says, "At-taqwa ha-huna," 3 times. "At-taqwa ha-huna, at-taqwa ha-huna." Taqwa, this thing, taqwa that Allah is mentioning right here, it's right here. And he points to his heart, right? Taqwa is something that we all strive for. You hear it in the Quran all the time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Fattaqullaha, fattaqullaha, fattaqullaha, wattaqullah." Like, be conscious of Allah, be mindful of Allah. You see it as fear Allah, right? There's so many different ways to translate it. But my favorite way, and the way that my teachers have shared, is to be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when you have something that comes to, some suggestion from the shaitan, or, maybe a particular sin that you might commit, taqwa is the thought of, Allah's going to be upset if I do this, or I just did that, I just sought forgiveness for that sin, right? That is taqwa. Taqwa is more than just I think, like, the superficialness of fearing God. And that's, sorry, and I apologize for saying that, it's not superficial to fear God, but what I'm trying to say is that taqwa is accessible to all. Everyone can be a person amongst the muttaqeen. It's not a club for only those who it's not a club for only those who pray all night and all day and fast every single day or every other day, or like taqwa. Anyone can be amongst the muttaqeen. All it requires is someone to be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we ask Allah to make us amongst the muttaqeen, right? But Allah, the Prophet ﷺ here is, kind of steering, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the Quran telling us the only thing that he cares about is that taqwa. He doesn't care about any of these other things that we used to maybe perhaps isolate ourselves from one another, or use to kind of, maybe think of it as a distinction, which we all are different, and there's beauty in that difference. But the Prophet says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cares about, that taqwa factor. And so what happens then is that they come to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these people, and they're curious about, well, what's going to be our end, right? What's going to happen to us, right? Are you coming to kill us? Are you coming to massacre us? Before that, yeah, I should mention that. They come and they say basically that, what's going to happen to us, right? And the Prophet says, listen, I'm from amongst you. I'm your brother, right? Like, and he says to them, I shall speak to you as Yusuf alayhi salam spoke to his brothers. Like, I'm going to say to you as Yusuf said to his brothers. And yes, yeah. And so the Prophet Muhammad says to them, he says, "O Quraysh, what do you think I'm going to do with you now?" And they replied to him, we hope that you treat us well. You are our noble brother and the son of a noble brother. And the Prophet ﷺ tells them to go and you all are free. I shall say to you, as Yusuf said to his brothers, that لا تثريب عليكم اليوم يغفر الله لكم وهو أرحم الراحمين. That there is no blame, right? Tathrib, like there's no blame or reproach against you today. Allah will forgive you. Like, may Allah forgive you. He is the most merciful and the most compassionate. And if you backtrack to the story of Yusuf comes face to face with his brothers who, committed that original crime of leaving him for dead at a young age. And can you imagine the amount of hurt and the amount of pain and all the circumstances that ended up coming out from that one particular action, right? Because they threw him down a well and all of the things that led up to there. And he ends up saying to them, after he says they recognize that he is Yusuf, and they're just like, so guilty. Yusuf says to them, there's no blame on you this day. May Allah forgive you, and he is the most merciful and the most compassionate. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, later after that has what happens is, another story is that the father of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Abu Quhafa, Abu Bakr brings Abu Quhafa to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says to Abu Bakr that, you didn't need to bring him. I could have went to him, right? But he says that Abu Quhafa is here so that he can take shahada. So the Prophet ﷺ ends up giving shahada to Abu Quhafa. And after Abu Quhafa, becomes Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ tells, he has like a head full of white hair, and the Prophet ﷺ tells Abu Bakr that, he can color his hair basically. But Abu Bakr says something that's so profound, right? And he says to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, today basically it is my father here that's becoming Muslim, but I wish that it was Abu Talib. I wish that it was Abu Talib who is here taking, shahada, because I know how much it hurt you that he passed and he did not become Muslim, right? And again, we're learning so many lessons from just these small, nuggets of interactions the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is having, that this is such a happy day, right? I mean, again, if you think about it, the way that the Prophet ﷺ is entering Mecca, and then now, his best friend, right, his father-in-law is becoming Muslim, and his best friend is saying, this is great, but I just know how much it would have meant to you if it was Abu Talib that was here in his place. And so the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after that, then another way that he honored sallallahu alaihi wasallam Abu Sufyan is that he said that, anybody who goes to the home of Abu Sufyan is safe, honoring that, plea that Abu Sufyan had, right? And what ends up happening is that Abu Sufyan ends up and his wife Hind end up becoming Muslim at Fath Makkah. So many people became Muslim at Fath Makkah, right? Ikrima bin Abu Jahl, okay, ends up becoming Muslim at Fath Makkah. his wife is in the city and sends a message that basically you can come back. He left the city, right? I believe, and went to Yemen, and his wife ends up, he's told that he can come back to the city. Like, Muhammad's not, doing what you guys thought he was planning on doing. And he comes back and he ends up, taking shahada, right? And giving allegiance to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what does the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam instruct the companions to do? I mean, we just said that this is the man who is the son of the Fir'aun of this ummah, right? The Prophet says literally the Fir'aun of this ummah, Abu Jahl. But nobody wants to hear their father cursed, right? Even though he was not a good man, right? He was a man who did a lot of harm to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And many of us might think to ourselves, no, whatever, I'm going to say whatever I want to him, because at the end of the day, I'm standing up for my Nabi, right? But the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam instructs the companions, don't curse his father, right? And through this, I'm hoping that we're all learning, like, look at the mercy of our Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, look at his leadership. Look at the humility that he has as a leader, coming back to the people who persecuted him for 20 years, right? And you see that this is how the Prophet ﷺ won hearts, because you find that then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is giving shahada to all these people, and they're coming and they're doing bay'ah, like they're going and pledging allegiance to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And so there's an oath of allegiance that ends up taking place. And you find this, there's a surah Mumtahina. In the last verse, there's a verse that talks about it's a bay'ah. So like that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is basically telling them that, you don't like that you don't steal, and that you don't commit zina, and that you don't kill your children. It's basically a list of oaths that you're taking, and that you don't وَلَا يَعْصِينَكَ فِي مَعْرُوفٍ, like, and that you do not disobey the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And so this is a bay'ah that the women ended up taking, and there's a bay'ah the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave to all the men and the women. So he would go into the men, he would give them that bay'ah, and he would take that bay'ah, and he would hold their hand, right? And he would take the bay'ah, but he wouldn't do that with the women, but he would still take bay'ah from the women. He just would not hold their hand. And so who is there when he's doing this? Hind, right? And if we remember who Hind was, if you go backtrack to the Battle of Uhud, Hind is not only the wife of Abu Sufyan, but she is also the one who put out an order to kill the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib radiallahu anhu. And so she's going, her face is covered. And so while the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is going through all of the different parts of the bay'ah, right? Like that you don't steal. And the narration mentions she's making comments like, look, we don't steal, like, that's not us, or that you don't kill your children. Why would we kill our children, right? And so it's like kind of awkward, because she's going back and forth with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But what you understand from this is that this is a woman who, again, clearly has a lot of pain. She has a lot of things that she's working through her own self. And the fact that she's going and speaking to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in that way, she's going back and forth in that way. And then, but she ends up taking that bay'ah, right, of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Obviously, she doesn't shake his hand, but she ends up becoming Muslim and taking that bay'ah from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another thing is the fact that there was a companion who, a companion by the name of Safwan bin Umayyah, who he overheard from someone that the only person who goes to paradise is someone who does the hijrah. So the hijrah, obviously, we understand from Mecca to Medina. And so now he's thinking, and if you don't make hijrah, then you're not a proper believer. So obviously you can imagine this is causing like some difficulty in a person. Like, I have to leave, right? So Prophet ﷺ makes a statement that لا هجرة بعد الفتح, that there is no hijrah after Fath Makkah, right? If you want to go to Medina, feel free, but you can stay here as well too. This city is now open for everyone, right? So the Prophet ﷺ ends up giving that clarification to Safwan, right? It is no longer a requirement. Before it was a requirement, but even in the requirement, there were people who were prevented. And obviously, if you're prevented, then again, you're not sinful for that. But if a person stayed back having the ability to do so, then of course, because it was a command that you have to make. It was a fard, right? Like it was a command. It was mandatory. Okay. And so there's no hijrah after Fath. And then there's two verses that were mentioned that are revealed during this time of Fath Makkah. The first one is such a beautiful verse that is really distinguishing those who those who came, believed, and stood alongside the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Muslims, right? We understand the concept of the Sabiqun al-Awwalun, right? We understand the concept of, Ahl Badr, for example, the people who fought in the Battle of Badr, right? We understand the Muhajirun, the Ansar, right? Even though the Prophet ﷺ loved them both, but we understand what it truly means to be there when the going was tough, when things were very difficult. Right now, we're talking about 20 years of the message and only about 2-3 years left. And so the fact that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made that he distinguished that there is no comparison in some things, right? Allah even mentions it several times in the Quran where he talks about, la yastawi al-qa'iduna, or he'll mention قل هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون. Say, are they equal, those who know and those who don't know? So we as Muslims believe in the fact that you can make these type of comparisons, right? And that it's just not equal at the end of the day. So Allah is saying here in this verse about these people who believed and these people who stood alongside the Prophet Muhammad before Fath. And why should you not spend in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while Allah is the sole inheritor of the heavens and the earth? Those of you who donated and fought before the victory over Mecca are unparalleled. They are far greater in rank than those who donated and fought afterwards. Yet Allah has promised each a fine reward, and Allah is all aware of what you do, right? Which is very, again, comforting. Knowing, yes, you can attain a special rank, but just know that those who fought before, those who donated before, those who stood besides, those who gave their lives cannot be compared, right? And another surah that was revealed is Surah An-Nasr, which we understand. We hear this, the different stories that Surah Nasr, إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا. That when God's help comes and he opens your way, O Prophet, and when you see people embracing God's faith in crowds, then celebrate the praise of your Lord and ask his forgiveness. He is always ready to accept repentance. It said that when the Prophet ﷺ, when the surah was revealed, Abu Bakr began to cry. And everyone else is just in shock, like, what's so sad? This is a beautiful surah. Right? The surah, look at this. It's actually like, look, people are accepting Islam in big groups. Why are you sad? But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu knew something that they did not know. That when you are at the tail end of your mission is when you then فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ. You ask forgiveness for your shortcomings. You continue to add to your mizan of hasanat, like you continue to add to your scale of good deeds, right? By thanking Allah, praising Allah. And so Abu Bakr understood, my messenger, my son-in-law, my best friend, his time is almost done. His mission is almost complete, right? And so these are two really important verse and a surah that was revealed during Fath Makkah. So how long did Fath Makkah happen, or how long did the Prophet ﷺ stay in Mecca? Different narrations say different days, 18 to 19 days, but we do know that it was the last part of the month of Ramadan, right? and that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came and he arrived in Mecca near the middle of the month of Ramadan and stayed throughout the rest of the month of Ramadan. And so with that is the end of the story of Fath Mecca. There are many lessons for all of us to learn from. What I take away the most is really just the humility of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. You know, a sign of a great leader is their ability to enact forgiveness in the event of seeking out revenge, right? You can tell the strength of a person not by how vengeful they are in their seeking of revenge, or in their seeking of their haqq, or what they are owed, but their desire for forgiveness and mercy, right? There's so much that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do to all of us, right? That he can seek out the right that he has for the shortcomings that we make. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the right to choose mercy or to enact his justice. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Inna rahmati ghalabat ghadabi, right? That my mercy supersedes my wrath, right? Or my anger. And so from this, we see the Prophet ﷺ many times where he had the opportunity to enact justice for the crimes that were committed, and he chose forgiveness, he chose mercy. And look at the way that things turn out in that way. And so I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to continue to benefit from this life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. It is such a spiritual experience to be able to learn these stories and reflect on his life and his character, so that we may be able to enact it in our lives as well too. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakumullah khair, Ustadha Faduma. That was absolutely beautifully done. Thank you so much. Amazing lessons for all of us tonight, alhamdulillah, who are benefiting from your talk. So we're now open for question and answers. We have 10 minutes left, and Ustadha Faduma has obviously agreed to stay on and answer and take our questions. You can unmute and either ask a question or you can type it into chat. I know Brother Faisal's on. He almost always has a great question.
Thank you, Abrar Bhai. So thanks also, Sister Faduma. So I guess my question to you is, just in terms of the psychology, you explained very well that the Prophet did not come for revenge. But how was it that the Meccans didn't resist? They may have been afraid, but up until that time, they were in a very warlike stance, even at the time of Hudaybiyah. But how is it they did not resist at all? So I just kind of explain that to me, please.
Yeah. I remember reading a story where Abu Sufyan, actually, there was a thought he had. So when the Prophet ﷺ was making tawaf, I believe, or when he was kind of in the vicinity of the Kaaba, he had thoughts, right? He had thoughts of like, how can I take out this man, or how can I hurt him, or how could he do this, and how can I allow this to happen? And the Prophet ﷺ had just a way, obviously we understand the miracles he had a way of reading people, right? And just kind of knowing what's on their heart, what's on their mind. And so, he basically went up to him and was just like, don't do it, right? Like, just, be easy, take it easy. And these were things that really shocked a lot of people, like how the Prophet ﷺ was able to read them. And I think at this point, they realized, like, there's no way that we can resist this man. Like, not only did we try everything in the book, but he is now in Mecca, right? And he's not alone. He's with all these people. And so how can we resist, right? Like, you saw at some point, you hear the statement, if you can't beat him, join him. But I do believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired within many of these people's hearts that acceptance and the fact that many of them actually believed in him. Many of them did believe in the message. What was holding them back was that arrogance. What was holding them back was the allegiances that they had to their tribes, and the fact that they didn't want to look like they were weaker. Well, in this moment, you are weak, right? So at this point, you need to wave the white flag. You have to accept defeat. But the sign of a good leader is not that humiliation in when you're accepting the defeat, but rather that mercy that the Prophet ﷺ came with. And I think that was what made, for a lot of them, that much easier, right? That much for a lot of them deciding like, okay, we're not just going to accept Islam, but we're going to stay Muslim because this is the truth, right? And this man is he doesn't have the face of a liar, right? He's not a liar. He's a great leader, and we want to actually follow him.
Okay.
Faduma, just go ahead, Brother Faisal.
No, that's great. Abrar, go ahead. I have one more question, but you go ahead first.
No, just trying to learn all the amazing lessons you just taught us. About diversity and incredible human resourcefulness. We talk about HR departments in large companies nowadays. Look at Rasulullah's amazing HR skills. Asking Bilal anhu to give the adhan on top of the Kaaba, to let people go. In terms of just simple for our youth, maybe who listen to this recording later, any lessons learned on just sheer leadership skills, right? This notion of looking ahead, seeing around the corner with tawakkul Allah that things are going to be positive, and letting go. Just comments about that. It's just an incredible lesson.
Yeah. SubhanAllah, there's so much in that question in and of itself. But, when you look at the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, especially, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was one that I remember when I first was reading it, when I was learning about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and when I was learning about the seerah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I remember thinking to myself, what Umar radiallahu anhu was thinking, like, how is this, going to help the Muslims in any way? Anyone would think that in the sense of like, this is going to make life a lot more difficult for the believers. Yes, it may grant some peace, but what about all those Muslims who are stuck, in Mecca, right? Like you're thinking about justice for them. But the fact that the Prophet ﷺ had that trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and had that vision. And I think a lot of times we struggle a lot with tunnel vision, like, just thinking and focusing on only the things that we see. That we see ahead, right? I remember when I was at Qalam and in our program, one thing that Sheikh Abdul Nasser would often say is trust the process, right? To not focus on all the little pieces that are going around or that are things that are happening, but really trust the process and trust the one who is guiding this process, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I can put my trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah's got my back, Allah's guiding me, He truly knows what's best for me. At the end of the day, I'm really just operating based off of my own ability to know what is good, what is bad, but that's based off of my own perception, and my perception is flawed, and as is everyone else's. And so, trying to connect to that piece of like, well, I'm going to then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His guidance. Because I know that if I ask Allah for His guidance, then He's going to guide me. I'm going to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide, not just to guide me, but to guide me to that which is best. Because then why would Allah deny that dua, right? We ask Allah every single day, Ihdina siratal mustaqim. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us to this beautiful path, this beautiful straight path. And when it comes to leadership, especially for youth, and looking at the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the way he empowered the youth and empowered his companions around him, what I feel like can be a challenge on a lot of times is, you see that everyone may be going towards one area, right? So everybody is wanting to go towards one particular career or maybe one particular area because that's just what's popular, or maybe it's due to one particular, for many different reasons. But then not looking within and thinking about what is it that you're talented in, what is it that can bring out the most beneficial work, how can Allah guide me to that which is most beneficial, asking Allah truly for that guidance. And when Allah inspires that guidance within you, to seek it out, because at the end of the day, those are the things that I think we should all be ambitious in and seeking out, and being happy with the diversity that comes with. It's so beautiful to see as a Muslim community how our beautiful diverse community is in so many different pockets of these states and in different industries, and how that is in turn benefiting our beautiful ummah as well too. So I think just in following not just the things that you're good at, but the things that you've asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you towards, if it is beneficial for you, and being okay with the fact that sometimes maybe things may not be the most beneficial, but because Allah guided you elsewhere, that might be where there's more benefit.
Actually, alhamdulillah, you answered my question, because it was going to be about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and how the Prophet knew that it was going to be so beneficial, whereas the rest of us couldn't see it, including Hazrat. But you answered the question, so jazakallah khair.
Wayakum.
Ustadha Faduma, thank you so much for your time. I think we're almost at time. Thank you so much, Jazakumullah khair, for really giving some beautiful lessons tonight about Fatah Makkah and just the something to take home with us. Inshallah, for everyone else and those listening in on the recording, this Friday evening, we have Ustad Mubin Kamani here with us at Islamic Center Boston and Wayland. He's giving khutbah and halakha for the youth group and for the adult community in person. He'll be here in person. You're welcome to come in. Just register online, inshallah, follow the emails, and we'll see you for dinner and halakha with Ustad Mubin Kamani, inshallah, Friday night. And then we'll be back, inshallah, virtually shortly as well. We'll announce that as well in our collaboration with the Qalam Institute. Assalamu alaikum, jazakumullah khair, Ustadha.
Wa yakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.